The Orange
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doctor PhD, otherwise known as Pat Haley. I am back once again for another absolutely exciting edition of the Orange Line. I am joined once again by my good friend and Flyers expert Nigel.
How's it going?
I'm all right. I uh, I did have one thought earlier this week though, strictly kind of about Philadelphia being a city that's just it's kind of disappointing. I remember reading an article a couple of years ago written by someone I graduated high school with. Shout out to Blake. But he wrote an article basically saying that Philadelphia is kind of just a city of disappointing sports teams. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because if you take a look at it, the Flyers seem to be that perennial team when it's like we go into a season and we're like this could be a good year. We won't say that this is the cup year, but this is a team that can absolutely make a push for the playoffs, maybe, get out of the first round and into the second, do something kind of exciting this year, and it kind of just doesn't work out that way. And the same kind of goes for the Eagles. I mean, as of recording, the Sixers are. I mean, the Eagles are 4-5. They just lost to Dallas, and they're coming off of a Super Bowl win. So everyone was thinking that this team's going to be pretty hot.
Yeah, the Eagles have been disappointing, and to touch on the Flyers, I mean, like you said, it felt early in the season that they'd come and make a splash pretty early. Um, but it was a slow start, another slow start uh, under Hackstall, which has pretty much been the story his whole tenure.
Yeah, and well, you have the Phillies, who are a bit of an interesting, disappointing case right now, only because they're a team that going into the season we knew weren't going to, win the World Series. They probably weren't going to make it to the playoffs. They were just, they're in a rebuild phase, and still at the middle of the season, I there was a point when I went, this team's looking pretty nice. This team's looking pretty good.
Yeah, well, I mean, watching that team through the first half of the season, I was actually pretty excited to see where they would go. Um, they were in first place, at most of the way through the season, and then they started making trades for veterans, and it really looked like they were going to be able to make it back to the postseason. That was a team, however, that you kind of watch through the whole process of the second half of the season, where it's like they were coached out of a playoff berth. It was really a situation where you know guys didn't look comfortable in the lineup. The lineup was changing every day. You were playing guys at different positions every day, and it's like all you really had to do was just play guys in a comfortable position, play them consistently. You didn't really have to go out and get all these veterans. Really, you just needed a couple, pitchers in the bullpen, and you probably would have been okay. But you coached yourself out of a playoff berth where Phillies are still a young team. They'll probably hopefully make that next step forward this year. But I mean, it looks like they're going to have to potentially change in the manager position.
Yeah, and well, that's what I'm saying is, at a point in this season, I was like, this team's looking pretty good. They could actually, be maybe not a contender, but they could just be a team that could make a wild card spot, make it interesting in the NL East, and they kind of just fell apart at the end. And now we have the Sixers, who have just acquired Jimmy Butler, and they're stacking up to be a really good team. And I try not to be a pessimistic Philadelphia fan, but I can't help but get that feeling of something might be approaching with this whole too good to be true scenario. You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, honestly, I would have liked to see how Jimmy Butler played with this team, yesterday. Um, I was kind of disappointed when that trade went through and then Butler wasn't in the lineup, but we'll really see their next game, how they look. The talk was that Jimmy Butler was a cancer in that locker room. Whether that's actually true or there was other issues that led to him wanting to leave Minnesota and Chicago before that, I mean, we'll really see if that remains to be true.
Yeah, and so I'm just kind of getting that feeling of maybe we shouldn't get our hopes up for this team. We got three big stars. We're looking like a pretty decent team that could, you know, be trouble for the East Coast, and that just kind of seems really good to me. And as a Philly fan, it just doesn't sit well.
So, I mean, I don't think it should be a situation where we shouldn't get our hopes up. I mean, I think we have the right to. I think, we trade for an all-star. We give up some good pieces, but, again, not the level of a Butler. Basketball is kind of a sport where, you really only need a good three or four guys to win a championship. So we'll see how that happens. But I mean, realistically, I think the Sixers should be a playoff team. They should be contending for that Eastern Conference title. But whether you actually have that championship against Golden State, I mean that remains to be seen. But
Yeah.
I think there's a real good chance with this team. Whether we get our hopes up too high, I mean, we still have to remember this is a young team. Ben Simmons is in his second season, and Embiid's in his third. The first two, I mean, he played maybe a full season combined. So I mean, it's still
Yeah.
a young team. So I think there's a lot to be said. A lot remaining to be said. What this team looks like the remainder of this year, but going forward, I think they're in a pretty good position.
Absolutely. And the cool thing going forward with this team is that they're obviously going in an upwards, trajectory. They're looking like all of the changes that are going with this team are positive, and that this team is just going to get better and better as the seasons go on. Which is an interesting thing that came to mind when talking about this kind of stuff, and thinking of the Flyers, because I just got curious in where we've really stacked up with Hackstall as our coach for the past 3 years, and maybe even a bit further than that, to get a feel of where this team was to where it is now. So I did a little bit of research and digging, and a while ago on my Twitter, I posted a poll saying, "Do you think that the Flyers have improved as a team in the past 6 years?"
Oh,
And
okay.
the four answers I put up was yes by a wide margin, yes by just a little bit, no, they've kind of stayed the same and plateaued, and no, they have actually gotten worse. So before I give you what my answer is, what would you say in the past 6 years?
So 6 years ago, so that would be 2012 and 2012. Correct me if I'm wrong. We made it to the second round of the playoffs after beating Penguins in a thriller in six.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Okay. From that point, I would say slightly down, if not flatlined. I would say
So
that's probably a pretty good bet for me on where this team is right now. Trending up, but with Hack, I don't know if you'll actually start to climb to where this team needs to be.
right. So I'll start with at least the Hackstall era, I guess we can call it, the past 3 years. And in the past 3 years, the first season that Dave Hackstall coached for this team, he earned us 94 points in the standings, which was good to get us into the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, where we lost.
We lost
The fi-
to Washington that year, correct?
I believe so. But the following year, we ended up getting 88 points, and we didn't even make it into the playoffs. Following that, we had actually jumped up 10 points and gotten to 98 and just barely made it into the playoffs. And I just want to keep that in mind only because of the fact that this this team was good enough to get 98 points, but realistically where the rest of the division and the rest of the Eastern Conference was, 98 points was, not enough to be like, yep, this team's a sure bet to get into the playoffs.
So I mean, last year at the second half, I remember there was a pretty big decline towards the end of the season where it's like we were actually in first place, three-quarters of the way through the season in the Metro, if you remember,
Mm-hmm.
and
I do.
we started playing really bad hockey at the end of last season, which kind of, you know, you go limping into the playoffs and then you're struggling a little bit. You don't
Yeah.
feel as comfortable going into the playoffs. I feel like the real hump in the Hackstall era, it's like you make the playoffs twice, which is fine, but you have yet to win a first round series, which I feel like that is the part that has a lot of Flyers fans a little annoyed.
Yeah, and so I went into the stats of the standings and where we ended up placing, and for the entirety of the NHL, I believe we ended up averaging to be about a top 16 team, which means we're literally right there on the cusp of being a playoff bound team and not being a playoff bound team. Um, and in terms of the East Coast, for those 3 years, we managed to stay a consistent eighth best team.
Okay.
Um, which only the only reason I point that out is for the 3 years, even though we made the playoffs once, didn't make the playoffs, barely made the playoffs. In all three, we've just been kind of behind the curve, and it's making me think that in Dave Hackstall's fourth year as a coach, it's maybe something to look at in terms of improvement because that's what he was here for. We had all these young kids on this team and a lot of talent that really should have been cultivated and grown and kind of just let let loose in a sense. Not that they can do their own thing, but give them a proper system where they can flourish.
Sure.
And
I'm sorry. Go on.
well, I was gonna say, and so we could use this as a marker of if the higher ups, I should say, are actually considering bringing him back or letting him go. I think that's a good mark to go. Around eighth place is your cap. If you are there or below it, you're gone. And if you're not actually improving this team, then you're not really serving your purpose here.
No, I know what you mean. It's I feel like what you said about putting the players in a system where they can flourish. I feel like that's in some sense been the opposite. I feel like he's been so strict of a coach in that you're so tied down to a system. And then if I guess you break in a sense, and make mistakes, it's like as a younger player, you aren't giving the opportunity again to thrive without taking your lumps. So that's been something
Yeah,
that's been difficult to deal with during the Hackstall era.
absolutely. And that's why I made the mark of has this team improved over X amount of years, 6 years, because I thought it was only fair to look at the 3 years prior to Dave Hackstall being the coach to get a sense of is this team actually improving with him. And in a way they have, and in a way they haven't. Um,
Okay.
so to go over my research, I found out that I believe on average the Flyers were the 19th best team uh, between the 3 years prior to Dave Haxtell, which means they've gone from 19 to 16. Uh, and I think the numbers that I'm going through are the 3 years before Dave Haxtell was the coach, they were 20th in the league, 13th in the league, and then 24th in the league, which is a pretty heavy drop.
Okay.
And considering where they were, with Dave Haxtell, you can see that it is an improvement in terms of overall placings for the NHL. But when you look at where we've been placing within the Eastern Conference, oddly enough, we have still stayed a consistent number 8.
So it's been stagnant.
Yes, which is really what I kind of came to the conclusion to is we we've continued to be a team that can get to the playoffs, but that's as far as the Flyers have gone in the past 6 years. They've been there, but they haven't really been a threat, if that makes sense.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
And so that's really why the whole idea came about is if if Dave Haxtell is this coach that we're kind of banking the future of some of these kids on, then I just want to see some improvement. And between the 3 years prior and the 3 years with him, he has taken us from a league wide 19 to 16, which is cool, I guess, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily help us. We've gone from a team that's like, maybe they'll make the playoffs to they're probably going to make the playoffs, they're still probably not going to do anything. So, in a way, like, yes, that's improvement, but it's not enough to be like, we're going to keep this guy around.
Yeah, no, I completely know what you mean. But it seems like the uh, the Flyers are almost not willing to make a change, kind of being complacent in a sense, which can be
Mm-hmm.
very frustrating, as a
Yeah, it's frustrating as a
as an
fan
organization.
and as an organization, absolutely. And I
So
think,
I'm
it,
sorry, go on.
well, I'll let you go. I've been
Well, I
talking
mean,
a lot.
it just brings me back to the point that we made a couple weeks ago, in that the uh, the Flyers kind of seem like if Schneider was still around, I feel like there'd be no way that either Hackstall or Hextall would still have their jobs, or both of them for that matter. I feel like there's not the upper echelon of management saying that there needs to be a change.
Yeah, I feel that. There's something that our mutual friend Jack has said to me a whole bunch is that this team has gone from kind of like a family type of organization that was cultivated by Ed Snyder to being an organization that's corporate. They're trying to push an agenda with Dave Haxtell, and they're trying to force a kind of etiquette for these flyers, and it's making the fans kind of irritated. And if Ed Snyder was around, seeing that the fans were unhappy with everything, he would go, "All right, you're out. I can't have the fans being upset because this is what we're doing." No matter what it is that you look at it, hockey as a whole is just entertainment. And
Sure,
if the fans aren't
as
being
all sports are.
entertained, yeah, if the fans aren't being entertained, then it's not worth doing anything in a sense. I don't know how Ed Snyder would put it, but I feel like from what he seemed like in running this organization, that seemed like his mentality.
Sure, of course.
And so it's rough when these teams that we're seeing in front of us every night are kind of just refusing to acknowledge the fact that the fans are discontent, that we aren't going to accept this level of play, and we're not going to be all right with how these teams are playing.
Well,
I'm not sure how else I can put it.
I think the frustrating part is that not that you know they think that we'll stand for that or not stand for that, but almost to the point where they're dismissive of our comments. I mean, I'd like to think that the Philadelphia sports fan base is a pretty well educated fan base when it comes to their sports, and when the coach and the GM come out off as almost standoffish and like dismissive of like the comments that the fans have, almost like, oh, you don't know anything. It's like that doesn't sit well with the fan base, and that honestly doesn't sit well with me personally as a fan.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me go back to the idea of this being a corporate company where it's like it doesn't matter what you think because we're still going to do this. We're making money, and we're doing what we think is best for business.
No, I know what you mean. It almost brings me back to a story of Ed Snyder, where it's like it was one of the early seasons of the Flyers, and there was some new board member for the organization who invited a Rangers fan, a higher up, Rangers person, into Ed Snyder's box and into the Flyers box, and it's like, everything through the game goes all fine, and it's like everything's polite, but it's like after the game, Ed Snyder kind of pulls this board member aside and is like, you know, if you ever invite a Rangers fan into this box again, like you're going to be kicked off this board. Like, and that's just kind of the mentality and like the emotion and how much Ed Snyder actually did care about this team. And it like you said, it almost seems more corporate than, you know, the true desire to win, at least from the utmost level of management. Your board of directors and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think going off of that, it's like, well, the Flyers seem so much more of a community than just a team. Like we as fans feel like this is something that we are part of. It's kind of like Green Bay in a sense, where the fans and the city of Green Bay owns the team, and it's not necessarily the same with us, but to an extent, it's like this is our community, and this is something that we all love, and it kind of feels like they're going, no, 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 no. You're the fans, we're the Flyers, and they're trying to distance us.
Almost have some sort of disconnect. I mean,
Yeah.
like you always hear about, players that used to play here, in the 90s and the early 2000s and before then, from opposing teams. It's like teams hated coming into Philadelphia to play, at the Spectrum, and it's like with the way that the teams kind of come out and the arena's died down from a fan base and an emotional level inside that arena. It's like teams aren't afraid to play here anymore, and I feel like you lose some of the Flyers, atmosphere and emotion when it comes to that. It's like teams used to be afraid, and it's like now it's like, oh, we're just going into Philadelphia, it'll be no problem.
Yeah, it's because of that community kind of feel where it's like you have to deal with the one of the toughest teams in the league where they all have an attitude, but you also have to deal with the toughest fans in the league where they're going to be on top of you, every single game. And that kind of reminds me of a top 10 list that TSN did a while ago for um, top 10 places that hockey players didn't want to play at, and on the list there was the Spectrum and the Wachovia Center, which it kind of speaks not just of the stadium that they were playing in, but of the fans that were coming into contact with this team, and
Sure, of
so
course.
we are a presence. That's why I love the quote by Coatsy that you hear for Flyers pregame all the time of when the Flyers come here and they play in Philadelphia, they're a whole different beast. And it's because the fans can be so electric that they can absolutely get behind the team. And right now it's hard to get behind the team when it feels like the people who are running the team don't even care about what we want.
Exactly.
And I remember hearing the quote. I can't remember if it was last season or early this season, but Ron Hextall said, like, oh, it's the fans that, every time they start playing at home, they're just not getting behind the Flyers, and, they're not giving it their all, and yelling shoot isn't conducive to anything. It's like, well, I'm not going to cheer this team if they're playing a way that I feel is dishonest to the fans and the organization.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, there
And
has to
and
be some sort of accountability, and it's like the fans know when the team's not playing well. Everyone thinks that it's like, oh, Philadelphia just is against their own team regardless of whatever's going on. But that's not the case. It's like the fans want the team to play just as well as they know that the team can play, and when they aren't playing that well, and it kind of feels like the team isn't meeting expectations, they're still on your side and they still want you to win, but you're going to be held accountable for that in a sense that it's like they're going to come at you and be loud and aggressive if you're not playing well.
which kind of comes back to the beginning of this podcast where I said that sometimes we go in with expectations. Like right now with the Sixers, we've got three guys that are absolutely great at playing basketball. And we're kind of going into this later, well, not later part of the season. We're still pretty fresh in, but we're going to be looking later into this season with some pretty lofty expectations of maybe we can be top 4 in the East, maybe top 3. What if we end up contending with Boston? That'd be really cool. And it's something that is across all four of our major sports is we have such high expectations for our teams, especially when things look pretty good on paper. Like this Flyers team on paper was looking great at the start of this season. Now they got a little
Unlucky with
road bump with JVR, and uh, other than that, it's like we could have been so much better of a team. And now that I had those expectations, I'm annoyed at this team for not even coming close to them.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and we're getting JVR back now, so hopefully he can put, I mean, a spark into a team that has actually been pretty good over the past couple weeks. They've been 5-0-1, 5-0-1 since no 6-0-1 since the road trip started. So hopefully they continue to play good hockey. It's 0-0 right now, and hopefully they get a win tonight too.
Yeah, we are recording this during the Flyers Panthers game. They're
Flyers
playing the Panthers
Panthers.
right now, yeah. Yeah. So hopefully they can keep getting the job done and finally get back to where we were kind of expecting them going in to this season, because we know this team can do some really cool stuff. It's just we need a bit of a jump start to it. And I think there are a few cards out there that could potentially help us. One of them could be a coach, others could be returning players.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So as I leave this podcast and say goodbye to all of you beautiful folks that are listening, I just want to ask you guys, what do you think is make or break for Dave Hackstall? Because now that you might have an idea of where the Flyers were before him, where they are with him, what do you think is going to mean he gets re signed or we drop him for this season? I would love to hear that, and I would love to hear Nigel's answer or any of my other friendly friends' answers, and potentially get them next time.
All right, awesome.
All right. So thank you so much once again, Nigel. Always a joy having you on the podcast,
Yeah, anytime.
and I will see you next time. If you would like, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. That is at Docter PhD, Docter. I assume Nigel still has nothing to plug,
Nothing to plug.
but he is such a great guy. So if you see him in real life, give him a nice wave. But like I said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one.